Today I'm going to transcribe a short Milt Jackson phrase, break it down into its basic musical elements, and then put it back together again in a bunch of different ways. First, let's check out the riff itself. That's it. This is from Opus De Funk, a composition by Horace Silver on the Milt Jackson Quintet / Modern Jazz Quartet recording from 1954. Milt plays it as his solo break leading into the first bar of a 12-bar blues. This riff consists of two harmonic elements, in my opinion. The first part is the diminished chord, which also outlines a F blues scale. The second part is an F7 chord in second inversion with a chromatic approach tone to the third. The main techniques I'm going to use to create variations on this theme are inversions, repetition, revoicing, changing the approach tone, and redefining the harmony. An inversion, as defined by Encyclopedia Britannica, is the, quote, rearrangement of the top to bottom elements in an interval, unquote. Since chords are collections of intervals, this means that we can invert the diminished chord, the blues scale, and the F7 chord in any number of ways. Repetition is a simple way to elongate a phrase but still maintain a similar melodic sound. Revoicing, which may or may not be an actual word, is when one or more of the notes from the chord is displaced by an octave, resulting in wider intervals between the chord tones. Changing the approach tones requires thinking about which chord tone will have a chromatic approach and how many notes you need to fill the rhythm. For example, the original has a chromatic approach to the third, but you could do a chromatic approach to the fifth instead. Redefining the harmony is when you take a line that is meant to fit over an F7 chord and you alter it slightly so that it fits over a different chord or maybe a different series of chords. Now, I'm no mathematician, but these 5 concepts combined with the 2 original harmonic elements of the Milt Jackson phrase should result in 4 billion possibilities of variation. Now, I've gone through all 4 billion of those painstakingly for you, and I've come up with 12 that I think are worth your time. I decided as I recorded them to put a little bit of improvisation in between to give it a little bit of time to breathe. Okay, so now let's go through each one and analyze it. So the original riff looks like this. Okay, so variation number 1 goes like this. So what I did was I actually just kept repeating the diminished chord all the way up to the top F. Then I used a chromatic passing tone, a chromatic approach tone to the 7th on the F7 chord. Right? So this E is not in the scale. That's a chromatic above the 7th. The E flat is the 7th. 5th, and then this is a very commonly used jazz approach tone to the 3rd. You go from half step above to half step below to the target notes. Right, and the last 3 notes are just the F7 chord. Good. Variation number 2 goes like this. Again, so instead of starting the diminished chord / blues thing on the D like the original one, what I did was I started up here and I went. So I basically played it backwards just with a little blues turn at the beginning. And then here we have the half step above, half step below approach tone to the 5th. That's the 5th of the F7 chord. And then here we have half step above, whole step below, and then chromatic passing tone to the 3rd. Variation number 3. Here I played the first part exactly as it was in the original. And then I continued up the same that I did in variation number 1. And then instead of going down to the 7th, I kept going up root, 2nd, and then this is another variation on the surrounding the 3rd with chromatic above, chromatic below. You actually do all 3 of them. And then down the triad. Variation number 4. So the diminished chord, F7, and then on beat 1 I did this, and then up the triad, and then down an octave. This part was kind of fun, and for the heck of it, I ended on the A flat. Okay, variation number 5. So here I have the blues riff, and then so I didn't even really do the diminished chord there. I just did this part. And then here I use the F7. Actually, it's the F major pentatonic with the passing tone between 2nd and 3rd. I called that the bluesy pentatonic. Actually, I have a video about that. Variation number 6. This one, I decided to add some wider intervals, so I was revoicing that diminished chord. So instead of playing, I skipped this, and I skipped that. And then I just went down the F7 chord. And then here's the surrounded 3rd. Root, 7th, root. Chromatic below the 3rd. That one lays really nicely on the vibraphone. Variation number 7. This time I flipped the rhythms around. So the first measure is only 8th notes with starting on the end of 1. The second measure has the triplet on beat 2. I still use the blues part on the first and the F7 in the second. So it goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, variation number 8. This one's harder to play on the vibes, but this one is the revoicing. So I did the tritones up, and then down a 3rd, then tritones. This is the F7 chord. That's all F7 chord stuff right there. This is the chromatic below passing tone, so that one's fun. Variation number 9. This one is where I changed the chords. So now, instead of just thinking F7, I actually put it over a 2-5-1, and that 2-5-1 being a dominant G7 to C7 to F7. 1. And now here, instead of playing F7, I'm on a C7, so I have to bend that. I turned that E flat into a chromatic approach to the E, which is the 3rd on the C7. And then root, passing tone, 7th, root. That's a very classic Milt Jackson riff right there. And then I got to the F7, and I just added that F at the end. Variation number 10. This is just back over an F7 chord. So there, I flip-flopped the two elements. The first 9 variations all had the diminished part first, and then the F7 chord. This one, I did it backwards. I did the F7 chord first, and then the bluesy diminished thing. So that's, again, it's just an F7 chord with the passing tone here and the 6th here. And then, so when you play this diminished figure on top of an F7 chord, what it does is this A flat functions as the sharp 9. This is the 11th. This is the sharp 11th. And really, you end up with this kind of a chord, which is a very cool sound. Variation number 11, I just decided to leave the diminished part out completely and only focus on the F7 with the chromatic passing tone to the 3rd. But basically it's just that F7 chord going down. The last variation, number 12. So this one I used repetition. I simply repeated that original phrase as is, just up the octave, and then played it as it was written. And instead of stopping there, I kept going. So I added an extra approach tone at the end. I repeated the diminished phrase at the beginning. 12 variations on a theme by Milt Jackson. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out the sheet music on my website and subscribe and come back, because every Wednesday there's a new video coming up until further notice.
We thank you for watching.